All right, so folks, today we're going to be talking about the industrialization and mechanization of farming. So we're going to be looking at basically the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and we're going to be discussing how it started with farming and how that affected the rest of the environment, basically. So our content standard is Content Standard 8. And it says the rise of corporations, heavy industry, mechanized farming, and technological innovations transformed the American economy from an agrarian to an increasingly urban industrial society. So you might notice right off the bat that we have a lot of vocabulary to make sure everybody's got a handle on. So we'll need to find out what a corporation is, what heavy industry is, mechanized, innovations, agrarian, urban, etc. All right, so our objectives. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to analyze how mechanized farming transformed the American economy, how to identify new technologies that made factory production more efficient. You should be able to draw connections between industrialization and urbanization. And you should be able to analyze how new technologies transformed the American economy. We have a lot of vocabulary in this unit, as you might know from the Quizlet that I assigned last week. So we have industrialization, agrarian society, urban, rural, urbanization, mechanization, mass production, plow, subsistence farming, Cyrus McCormick, who's the only individual on the list, agricultural mechanization, McCormick's mechanical reaper, obviously made by Cyrus McCormick, threshing machine, capitalism, free enterprise, free market, capital, profit, consumer, capitalist, worker, and corporation. All righty, so here we go. So guys, the Industrial Revolution, if you remember from last year, began in Great Britain in the 1750s. Does anybody remember from your study of the Industrial Revolution last year what industry was the first to industrialize in Great Britain?
Factories.
Say it again, sorry.
Factories.
Yeah, well, factories are where all the industries went. I'm asking what was the first thing that they produced in the factories? Does anybody know? You're all wearing some variation of this product, and it's another word that stands for cloth, and it starts with a T. Does anybody remember what the word is? Say it again.
T-shirt.
No, but good try. It's called textiles. Do you know this word?
Yes.
Okay, so textiles is the production of cloth, and prior to the Industrial Revolution, textiles were made in people's homes. Somebody would go out, you'd live on a farm, somebody would go out and shear the sheep in the spring, and then somebody would have to clean the wool and card the wool and, spin it and weave it and do all that stuff. And this took a lot of time. And over the course of a year, a family would be able to usually produce enough wool to make enough cloth to clothe their own family. But that was about it. They didn't have a lot of time for extras. And then it started as what they called a cottage industry, where people would be able to spend more time on the weaving and the spinning and that sort of thing. And you had entrepreneurs, these individuals who would go and get the wool from a farmer, who would take it to somebody who would clean it and card it, and then you'd take it to somebody else that would dye it, and somebody else who would spin it, and somebody else who would create the cloth out of it. But it was a very time-consuming process, and eventually they started creating inventions that would do some of these things a lot faster. Like instead of spinning on a single spinning wheel, you might get 100. The spinning mule was an invention that would allow 100 threads to be spun at the same time on one machine, but this thing had to be powered by water, and that's not something you can usually do in your home. And so this was the beginning of factories. So when Great Britain started this textile industry, they were making a lot of money from it, and it was extremely beneficial to them. They were like the only people in the world who had this factory system set up. And so they treated it much like it was like a top secret kind of thing. They would search people before they would allow them to leave the country to make sure they were not taking plans of a textile mill with them. They would, if you ever worked in a textile mill, they would. And it wasn't until there was a gentleman by the name of Samuel Slater who happened to have a photographic memory, and he was able to memorize the plans for a textile mill, pretty much like that. And he managed to get out of Great Britain, came to America, and started up America's first textile mill somewhere around 1780-ish, roughly. And so America started its own textile production. It took, a little while to get it up and running. So somewhere around 1800, America is suddenly in competition with Great Britain for textile production. So the Industrial Revolution had at that point spread to America. Now, America gets started in this Industrial Revolution, and like I said, it started somewhere around 1800, and we get just up and good and running, and we end up with a big event in America that puts a stop on all industry for a little while, for about 5 years. Anybody know what the big event is in the middle of the 19th century that pretty much stops production? Not the Great Depression, that's in the 20th century. What happens in the 19th? This is the 1800s.
World War.
World War is in the 20th century. No, it was a war. But what major war happened in the middle of the 1800s? Which one?
Cold War?
No.
War of 1812.
Well, that did happen in the 1800s, but it was later than 1812, before 1900. Starts with a C.
Civil War.
The Civil War. This is the war that ended slavery between 1860 and 1865. Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860, and he was very anti-slavery, and that was the thing that, started the secession of the states. So the first little chunk of the Industrial Revolution, which was mostly textile industry, some railroad industry, some steel industry, was just kind of getting started prior to the Civil War. So we call that our first Industrial Revolution. And then the period of time that we're going to be talking about is what we refer to as our second Industrial Revolution, that started up after the Civil War. Okay? So again, the Industrial Revolution is a period of time where we're going to be, instead of producing goods by hand at home, factories are going to replace that work. So that is going to require that people are going to have to live in different places. Instead of living on a farm where you do some of this work on the side in your home or during the winter months in your home, once we have factories started, people are going to have to work 365 days a year in the factory, and they're going to have to move close to where those factories are. And factories were usually located in cities because they needed transportation access, right? So the railroads and things. So this Industrial Revolution is going to cause a movement of people into cities, and it's going to cause the growth of cities. So factories were a positive thing because it allowed people to manufacture major amounts of goods. This is called mass production, okay, producing a whole lot of stuff, multiple copies of exactly the same thing. It's called mass production. And the more you can produce in the same period of time, the cheaper that item becomes, okay? So once you can mass produce things, the prices are going to go down, which is going to cause an increase in demand. Okay, let me say that again. As prices go down and everybody can afford to buy that particular thing, the demand for it is going to increase, right? So, for example, being able to buy cloth. Most people made their own cloth because it was so expensive to buy it when everybody was doing it by hand. Once it moved into the factories, the price of the material, the cloth material, got much cheaper. And so then more people could afford to buy it instead of making it themselves. And that was a major accomplishment. Okay. So this idea, as goods become cheaper, and the demand increases, that's also going to increase the demand for jobs, which is going to lead to even more people moving into the cities, and it's going to cause urbanization or the growth of cities. Okay, can I go on? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay, here we go. So we're going to be looking today at how the United States changed from an agrarian country to an urban industrialized society. Remember that when America started, everybody was a farmer. Even if you lived in a town, you might, for that matter, when it first started, if you lived in a town, you still had a cow or two, you still had a kitchen garden, you were still producing enough food to feed yourself. You might be able to buy some things, but people grew their own vegetables for the most part. So we're going to be changing from agrarian to industrialized, where people in the city no longer need to do that. So we're going to get some vocab down to begin with. So the first vocabulary word we're looking at is the word rural. So rural means country, and it is characterized by low population. You have a lot of unoccupied space, and the main occupation in these areas is farming or agriculture. Okay, so agriculture is just a fancy word for farming. That needs to go in your vocabulary thing. The adjective for agriculture is agrarian. So we might talk about an agrarian culture or an agrarian country, which just means that their main production is farming goods. Okay? So agriculture, agricultural, agrarian, these are words you need to know. They all refer to farming occupations. Okay, everybody clear on what rural is? Thumbs up, thumbs down? All righty, Rennie. So the next word we're going to look at is its opposite, which is urban. So here's a picture of Manhattan in New York City. An urban area is a city area. It's characterized by very high population, crowded living conditions, lots of different occupations, lots of forms of entertainment. So you've got theater, sports, shopping, bars, dances, free concerts in the park, all kinds of things that happen if you live in a city. If you compare this to people who lived in the country at the time, where they were living probably miles away from their closest neighbor, living in the city was a very exciting thing. Okay, can I move on? All right, so you need to know that urbanization is the growth of cities. So write that definition down for me, please. Urbanization is the growth of cities. Now, I want you to look at this graph for me, and we're going to analyze it here a little bit. Somebody tell me what is being measured on the left side of the graph, please.
The population.
Population, yes, and it is in exact numbers, like the exact number of people that live in the area, right? If you look on the right side, what's being measured on the right side?
Density.
Population density. Can anybody explain what the term population density means?
The amount of people in like a certain area.
Exactly true. Yes. So it's exactly that. It's the number of people living in a given area. Now, this one is giving us density in hectares, which that's not a term that's used a whole lot, but basically it's about the size of 6 soccer fields put together. Okay. So if you can imagine 350 people living this is their living space, sleeping space, and everything else in the space of 6 football fields. It's not terribly crowded yet at that point, but it gets that way. When you look at it today, that number would probably be, for New York City at least, would be in the hundreds of thousands. Okay, because the bigger cities get, the higher the buildings get, and the more people are living on top of each other in apartment buildings, right? So you have a larger number of people living within the same given amount of space. So we've got 2 lines on here. What do those lines represent? The red one represents population, the gray one or blue one, whatever you want to call that one, represents density. What is the distance between two green lines on this screen? So if the distance that they have marked on here is 20 years, but notice that there's a blank green line in between. So what is the actual distance between each of the green lines? 10 years, right? Okay, so can somebody on here tell me, in what 10-year time period did the population density increase the most in Manhattan? This is a graph of Manhattan in New York City. In what 10-year time period did the population density? I can say it one more time, Melody.
1900 to 1910.
That is correct. 1900 to 1910 is the time period that the population density increased the most. So you can see that time period particularly is a time when lots of people are moving in. But really, any time from the time of 1800 up until 1910, the trend or the overall movement of the graph is increasing, right? What happens to the trend of population in the cities between 1900 and 1980? The overall trend, is it up or down?
It starts to go down.
It starts to go down somewhat. And then from 1980 on, we're going to see that it increases again. All right. So let's move on a little bit. All right. So why are cities growing? This is the question. Why are cities growing? Well, first of all, they're growing because of mechanization. Mechanization means that we're doing with a machine what we used to do by hand. So whether that means spinning thread or weaving cloth or I don't know, putting cars together, whatever the case is, right? Making parts, metal parts for a gun. If those things are now being done by machines instead of being done by hand, this is called mechanization. So again, the second industrial revolution in America starts after the Civil War. And during this time period, we're going to see more and more workers working in factories instead of working at home. They're going to be machines that are going to be steam powered at this point. So by the time we start the second industrial revolution, we've already gone through a couple of methods of powering these machines. And the first one was the water wheel. You guys are all familiar with what a water wheel looks like for running a grist mill or something like that, right? So that was what they powered their first factories with, was a water wheel. Now they've gotten to the point of steam power. So in steam power, you're using coal to heat water, and the water is forcing pistons to move up and down and causing the machine to turn just like the water used to. So again, the stronger the power you're using, the faster the machines can go. So once we hit steam power, we're producing even faster than we were before. And the general idea with mass production, and again, mass production is producing a large quantity of goods, right? Mass production usually means the cost goes down. Okay, mass production generally means cost goes down. And the cheaper goods get, the greater the demand. Let's take an example of a modern thing. How many of you could afford to go out and buy the iPhone? I don't know what number they on now, 12 or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that, and they're like, what, $1,200? I don't know, they're expensive. They're more than $1,000, right? How many of you could afford to go out and buy $1,000 cell phone? If you can, you know, you got to tell me what you do for a living, because I couldn't afford it and wouldn't want to. Your parents can, well, good for your parents, Joseph. I couldn't, because it's just crazy amount of money to spend on a phone, in my opinion. However, well, there you go. All right, good for you, because it's a good putting a good controls on your money. I agree with you, Tier. I think it's silly, but in any case, as phones are out more often, the phones are more mass produced. And in the case of technology, I guess, as technology becomes a little more outdated, what happens to the prices for those phones? They get cheaper, right? So, you know, once the iPhone 12 comes out, the iPhone 11 is more obsolete and the prices are going to go down some. Probably still not cheap enough for me to afford to buy one, but nonetheless. All right. So the goods are going to get cheaper. This is going to cause a greater demand, meaning we need to produce more of them, meaning we need more factories, more jobs, etc. All right. So these cities are located in, sorry, these factories are located in cities because once we have steam power, we don't have to be located by a river anymore, right? We need water, but most cities provide water. So we can set up a factory in a city, and our biggest concern as a factory is going to be transportation. We need transportation of raw materials into our factory. We need transportation of our products out of our factory and to our markets. What is the biggest method of transportation in 1860, 1870? Anybody know? What would be your fastest method of transportation on land? Trains. Trains, yes. Trains, good, Joseph. Thank you. And thank you, Tara. So, yeah, so these people are going to be located where there are trains. Okay, that is going to be extremely important. So, let's move on. So, keep in mind that America, all the way up until 1920, really, guys, is a mostly agrarian nation. We have more agriculture in this nation than any other industry until 1920. 1920 is the first year when industry surpasses agriculture in terms of the overall domestic production. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So, up until 1920, the majority of Americans lived on farms, or they lived in small rural villages where you might have a job that's not particularly farming. You might be a blacksmith or a store owner or something like that. But most people lived in very small towns or on farms. Most farmers were subsistence farmers, which means they could grow enough to feed and clothe their own family, but that was about it. They didn't have extras to sell. So the change is going to happen in order to support all of these people that need to live in the cities for industrialization to happen. There has to be a simultaneous industrialization of the farms, because if you cannot produce more food than an individual family can eat, then you cannot afford to support people who live in cities. Does that make sense? For example, where do we get our food from? We get our food from the grocery store, from Kroger's or wherever. Where does Kroger's or whatever grocery store you go to get its food? So usually there's from factories, usually, because the factories are what take the wheat and turn it into cornflakes, or, you know, well, not cornflakes, but Wheaties, or take the corn and turn it into cornflakes, or take the green beans and put them into a frozen bag or a can or whatever that we would buy at the grocery store. But the farmers are going to sell to the factories are going to sell to the grocery stores, and we're going to buy the food at the grocery store, because we are not going out in our backyards for the most part and growing enough food to feed our families for a year, correct? So that means somebody has to be doing it for us. And for all of the hundreds of thousands, millions of people actually in America that live in cities today, we have to have farmers out there producing enough food to feed those of us who are no longer growing our own, right? So farmers are extremely important to every society. They are the foundation. Without that, people can't diversify into other activities. All right. So, what changes? Um, at this point, the family farms are the basis of the nation's wealth and the economy. But what we're going to see is that industrialization is going to take over, and the majority of people by 1920 are going to be working and living are going to be working in factories and living in the cities. Okay, and this is going to affect the life of the family as well as the work that people do. So it's important for you to know that the Industrial Revolution changed the way people lived, and it changed the nation's economy. So when it comes to the way people lived, keep in mind that when you were working at home, it was a man and a woman generally. Sometimes maybe the grandparents might live with you, and the children. And everybody on the farm worked. Everybody, from the time that you are big enough to carry sticks to put in the kindling box, you are doing work, right? So by the time you're 4 years old, you're doing something to contribute to the household, whether it be collecting the eggs from the chickens or collecting sticks for the fire or whatever. There are jobs for children from early on. By the time you are 6 or 7 years old, you would probably be responsible for chopping wood, for carrying water into the house, for milking cows, for cleaning stalls, all kinds of things. Much earlier than we do in our current world. Okay, children were they were put to work from day one. Okay, but the advantage to it is that you're working with your parents. If your parent notices that you do better at one job than another, they can make those changes. If your parent feels that you're not feeling well that day, or that you just need a break and need to go fishing or go play or whatever, the parent can make those decisions. Once you start working in a factory, you don't have that say anymore. Parents can choose at the same time. They're working for themselves. So if they want to take an hour off in the afternoon, they can take an hour off in the afternoon. You can't do that very often if you're going to survive, but you can do it, periodically. There are choices that you can make that are all your own when you're living on your own. Once you are living and working under somebody else's control, those choices are no longer yours. Does that make sense? You have to be at work when the bell rings to start the machines, and you have to work straight through until the bell rings to stop for lunch or whatever. So a lot of your own personal freedom goes away, and the freedom within your family to control, what your child does or whatever changes a lot at that point. The nation's economy is also going to change. It's going to grow a lot, and it is going to become more based on industrial products rather than on agricultural products. All right, so I want to talk to you about how farming changed so that you can appreciate the difference that mechanization made. So again, mechanization is doing things by machine that used to be done by hand. So I'm going to take you through a year on the farm in terms of growing wheat and what that process might look like, okay? In order to grow wheat, the first thing you have to do in the spring is prepare the fields by loosening up the soil so that the seeds have an environment that allows them to grow easily. So if you look at the plow on the left, this is a plow that did not change in probably close to 2,000 years. If you were walking around on the planet when Jesus was alive, about 2,000 years ago, they would have had a plow that looked very similar to this. It's pulled by horses or mules or some other animal form. It's basically a piece of metal that is shaped to cut into the ground, and it is, balanced by the guy walking behind the team of horses or mules or cows or whatever, right? So that machine on the left there had not changed in a long, long time. By the time we get to mechanization, first of all, what is going to replace animal power? What do you see over on the right that's going to replace the power of the animals here? Yes, what kind of a machine? What is the main machine on a farm? So the plow, hold on for a minute. Yeah, it's the tractor. It's the tractor. The tractor is the engine, right? The tools behind it are tools. You can attach a lot of different tools to the back of a tractor, but the tractor is the power, right? Now, tractors started out actually as steam engines, believe it or not, and eventually they were replaced by combustion engines. But if you look at the plow on the right side, how many, if you look at the little on the left, do you see the little indentations in the soil that the guy is creating? Can you see those little hills that are created there? Yeah, so those are called furrows, okay? Um, this guy is creating one furrow that's maybe about 6 or 8 inches wide, right, as he's turning the ground over. Look over on the right. How many plows are attached, or cutting blades are attached on the back of that tractor? Okay, 6 or 8, quite a few, right? And you can also see that the size of the furrow is considerably larger. I mean, he's literally turning over the soil. It's probably a foot wide, right? So generally what would happen once you create this machine on the side is you would run over and you would turn the soil upside down like this with the plow. So you now have the grass underneath or whatever, and you have the dirt on the top. And then they would go over it again with a machine called a disc, which is basically just a lot of metal blades that roll along and basically just break the soil up into fine particles so that it's easy to plant, right? They could run over this thing 2 or 3 times in the amount of time it would take this guy over on the left to plow the same space, right? All right, so the first process in farming is plowing. The second process in farming is planting. Now, I didn't find a very good example of a person who is planting wheat. This person on the left is actually planting onion sets, which are, small onions, have a very, kind of look like green onions a little bit, but they have about a 6-inch stem on them. But I put it in there because I wanted you to think about the manual labor involved in farming. Planting, some things have to be planted like this, and some things, a lot of things, have to be picked like this. So you can imagine the difficulty on a person's body to have to be bending over all day long, multiple hours a day, right? Um, but if we're getting back to how wheat is planted, wheat usually you would have a person who would, you'd have like a sack of wheat seeds in a bag that you would hang over your shoulder, kind of across your chest, over your shoulder. And you would put it over sort of on your left hip, and you'd reach into it with your right hand, grab a handful of seeds and throw them out in front of you as you're walking across the field, just constantly walking, throwing, walking, throwing, walking, throwing. And this was called sowing seeds. And that was the way that most people planted during this time period. And it required a lot more physical labor to walk across the fields and throw with your arm like that rather than to sit on a little machine like they have on the right. Um, but it also had problems in that not everybody sows seeds equally well, which means that, sometimes you might end up with too much seed in one spot and not enough seed in another spot. It wasn't very uniform. So they created something called, very inventively, a seed planter. And basically what this is a barrel that has seed placed in it, and it has screens basically that are just barely big enough to allow single seeds of wheat to fall through it. And so as this seed planter moves with the horses over here, the barrel turns around and it drops seeds, on a regular pattern across the ground. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, there are different types of seed planters for different types of crops. When I was growing up, we had corn seed planters, and they were a little bit different than this. They had, do you guys know what a funnel is? I know that sounds like a stupid question, but they don't have them in kitchens as much as they used to. So they used to have this thing that looked similar to a funnel. And so it was like a round barrel like this, but it had these funnels that were stuck all the way around it. And the barrel in the middle would be filled with corn, and it would drop just like two seeds into the funnels as they went around. And so your corn was planted about every 8 inches apart or so. As this thing went across, you'd have like two corn seeds in a hole about every 6 to 8 inches apart, which was appropriate for seed corn. So they came up with different ways of doing this, but it was the same general idea. All right, I need a drink. Hold on one second. Okay, so this is the process now of harvesting wheat. So in the top right hand side, you see this picture. These are three Amish guys. The Amish still kind of produce wheat this way. But what you see here is this device that they have called a scythe. Do you guys know what this device is? If you think about the Grim Reaper, that big blade that he carries around with him all the time. That's what they're using here. It's called a scythe. Okay. And the Grim Reaper is actually a character who comes from about this time period. And the idea is, he's supposed to be sort of like the angel of death or whatever. And the idea is that he's cutting your life away from the earth. That's the symbol of that scythe that he's got with him, that he's taking your life, right? So when you harvest wheat, you would have a huge field. You can see this tall grass-like stuff, which is what wheat is. And these guys are standing just far enough that they're not going to risk cutting their neighbor with their scythe. And they literally just swing this blade back and forth to cut the wheat off at ground level. So all day long, they're swinging and they're cutting, swinging and cutting, swinging and cutting, swinging and cutting. What do you think that would do to your body by the end of about a 10-hour day?
You would be sore.
You're going to be ripped, yes, you are, but you are going to be sore and tired. You are going to have a lot of muscles, yes. You're also going to be eating a lot more than we normally would eat today, because you're going to be active like this almost every day. So people were a lot thinner back then because of the physical activity they had to do all the time. So they're going to go through and they're just cutting this wheat, right? Behind them are going to come the women and the children who are going to pick up this wheat, and they're going to gather it together into bundles. And the bundles they called sheaths, and they're probably about a diameter. You grab a big handful, so you maybe got a diameter of about 4 to 5, maybe 6 inches, and you would take other wheat stalks and tie it around there to hold them together. And then lots of sheaths are kind of put together, standing up on end, so that the wheat can continue to dry. So you've got the women and children coming after, who are doing a lot of bending over, picking up. sitting it down, bending over, picking up, sitting it down. Not easy work. Once you have it all cut and standing in sheets in the field, and you're hoping that it doesn't rain when all this happens, right? You have to then go through with the wagon and pick up all of these sheets and take it into the barn where it's protected. All right. That's just getting it out of the fields where you haven't made it into any food yet. Right. Now, what you see in the bottom left-hand side, this is called threshing. So if you look at this, these guys have sticks that are held together by a piece of leather. So it's two sticks, one here, and they're held together with a piece of leather. It's kind of like a larger version of nunchucks, right? With a shorter chain in between, but it's kind of the same idea, just shorter variation, right? So what these guys are doing is they go into an area that has a clean barn floor and they spread out some sheets of grain and they beat the hell out of it, basically. And what you're trying to do is to break the seed of the wheat away from the straw, which is the grassy part and the shell that covers the seed, right? So they're going to beat this up for a long time until the chaff and the wheat is kind of broken up and it's all separated out so that all you have left is the wheat seed. But it's in the midst of all of this straw and stuff, and you have to figure out how to separate it. So what do? They sweep it up. And if you look at the picture on the right side, they are going to pile it all together here, right? And somebody is going, this process is called winnowing. And what they would do is they would wait till they have a nice breezy day. And they would use back in the 1800s, they would have used like a basket of some kind, like a woven basket. And they would go out on cloth or something in the breeze, and they would shake this around, toss it up in the air and catch it, toss it up in the air and catch it, shake it a little bit, toss it up and catch it, and the wind is going to blow away the chaff, which is what used to cover the seed, and the straw is going to be blown away, right? And what's left is the heavy part. The seed is going to fall back in your basket. And so you're going to have to keep doing this over and over and over again until you have seeds left in your thing and most of the straw is out. Then you're ready to grind it up and make flour out of it, and then you're ready to make bread. Are you seeing how long this process takes? This is not easy by any means, okay? So, what did we do with machinery? Well, they came up with McCormick's mechanical reaper. So remember we talked about the Grim Reaper? That's what those guys were doing back there with the sides, is they were reaping wheat, right? So here they come up with something called a mechanical reaper. Look at how many animals they're using to pull this machine. It's a great big huge old machine, but it has these long blades that come out to each side, and they're probably able to cut as much with this one machine as it took all three of those other guys to do in a week. Okay, this machine, an average person, an average man could reap about 3 acres of land a day. This machine could probably do 4 times that in a day without a problem. Okay, so here you have the machine that is going through and it's reaping the wheat. This is, now I'm assuming that they're using some kind of a method of capturing it also. This got advanced much more quickly pretty soon. It was all kind of caught up and it was all kind of one process, but they would have to come back and gather this up at some point. But in any case, this becomes the threshing machine. Now, if you look at this great big old device over here, you can see that this is the straw that's being blown out of this big pipe over on the right side. Over on the left side of the picture, if you see where the guys are standing up on top, that is a conveyor belt. So the guy is standing on a wagon and he's putting the sheaths of wheat into the threshing machine, which has inside of it a bunch of knives and blades that chop all of this stuff up from the get-go. And it does basically what all those guys were doing by hand with the machine. And it goes through and through and through, and then you get out on the one side, the wheat comes out in a wagon and the straw gets thrown out on the ground. So it kind of separates them out into two piles, basically. Does that make sense? So while this is still a lot of work, it's a heck of a lot easier than doing it by hand. So I'm going to see if I can show you a little video of this process real quick. On YouTube. YouTube's being very slow. All right, so let's see if I can. What can you guys see on my screen? Can you see my whole screen, or can you see only my, you should be able to see my whole screen, right? I need to show you this particular video.
Yes, I can see it.
All right, I think if you're going to hear it, I have to stop presenting. I have to show this particular. I want a window. I want. It's not what I wanted. All right, let's see if this gives us a good description of what we're looking at here. So this is a steam tractor from about 19. Oh, sorry. Can you see it now? So this is a steam-powered tractor, which gives you an idea of what some of those first machines might have looked like. They're a lot larger and a lot heavier than a current tractor would be. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because, there's only so much of a tractor we can set up with. Now, this little device right here, if you can see that belt that's being attached to the tractor, that belt is what is going to power the threshing machine. And there was lots of farm machinery that was powered by belt like this. We had this when I was a kid on the farm. And this was just, a very typical way of anything, the corn grinder or anything that needed power that was a separate machine would be operated by this thing. But you can see how this is going to be dangerous and that he has to back up to make the tension tighter in it. But you can see how things like this could lead to injuries with people working on farms. Sorry? I heard, is it supposed to, and then I didn't hear.
Is it supposed to sound like that on this video?
Yeah, can you not see it?
I can see it, but it's right.
He said it's supposed to sound like that.
Oh, well, it's sounding like that because you're hearing me talking and it's on my projector. So they're not saying anything. All you're hearing is the sound of the engine. Okay, now, can you see these little, I'm trying to manipulate between the video running and my sound being on, because since I'm at school, it's going through the sound system, so it's causing reverberation for you guys. But if you see where the guys are standing on the wagon, they're standing on top of the wheat over there, and they're going to put it down on this little platform or table kind of thing that's sitting right on top of where you see the belts going over there to the machine. And behind that, you're going to see these kind of blades that are running up and down, and that's what is going to, cut this stuff up. So watch for that, and watch for the stuff starting to spit out of the little chute out of on the top right of your screen over here. Okay, I'm going to start up again. So now if you're watching carefully, do you see the chute that's coming down? Not the one where the straw is coming out, but the other chute that's coming down with the little chute into the wagon on the right side. That's where your grain is coming out. If you look real carefully, you'll see some of that coming down here. We'll do just another minute or two and then we'll stop. Okay, thoughts, feedback, what do you think?
I think you're right. It could be dangerous with the whole band. Like, it could like pop off.
Yeah, the bands could pop off. What other accidents do you think could happen?
By the grinder, if you're not careful putting stuff in, you could probably like chop your hand.
Yep, absolutely. My point with that is that we're going to be talking about industrial accidents later, but my point is for you to know that there were a lot of accidents that happened on farms as well. You know, people during this time period would have been, you know, the guys up on top shoveling this stuff down would have probably been about 12 years old, in all honesty, right? The father would have been running that machinery, the tractor and whatever. Oldest son would probably be manipulating and making sure that the threshing machine is doing all right. And most of the labor would be being done by the kids anywhere from 9 to 16, 18 years old. So when you put younger people in charge of things, sometimes they're not as coordinated, they're not as skilled at certain things, and accidents happen. So would it be possible for somebody to trip and fall into that machine? Yep. You know, there are all kinds of ways that people could not only get hurt, but potentially lose their lives if they're not careful in any of these kinds of jobs. Okay, people, we are done for today. So let's stop these notes here and we will pick up next time. And if you have any questions or anything, or you need to see me, by all means, let's do that during advisory or during office hours. Okay? Any questions?
No.
Okay, guys. So thank you very much. Take care, and I will see you on Thursday. Have a good one. Are you talking to me, sweetheart?
Yeah.
Say it again, please. We probably will not finish them, but we will work on them again. These notes are long. They're about 10 or 12 pages long, so we'll probably be working on them still after Christmas. All right. See you on Thursday. Bye. Alicia, I'm not sure if I did. What was it in reference to, honey? I am not sure. I've been trying to get through the grading. I will double check and see what I have from you right now and try to get it in. If you don't see it show up in the next hour, will you check with me during office hours, please? Thank you, honey. Bye.
Ms. Gunn,
Yes, sweetheart.
what was the code for the pure deck? Because my computer just went slow and it wasn't working. I had to restart it again. And I was on my phone. I missed some notes.
Okay, so it's in Pear Deck, but it's not. I'll put it on self-paced and give you the code as long as you promise not to go past where we ended up today. Okay, let me do that. Your code, are you ready to write this down?
Yes.
NAAXDM. You got it?
Yep, thank you.
No problem.
See you, bye-bye.
Bye. If you're missing work, yes, please come to office hours. Yeah, if you're not missing anything and you're happy with your grade, you're fine. Okay? Kalia, do you need anything? Javante, do you need anything?